The first thing that jumped out from the Eagles' OTA session was not just who was on the field, but how different this team already looks heading into 2026. Even in late May, with voluntary practices and several veterans absent, there is a very clear feeling around this roster that major changes are happening behind the scenes, and some of them could completely reshape the future of the franchise. At the Jefferson Health Training Complex in South Philadelphia, the media finally got its first close look at the Eagles during open OTAs, and there were several developments that immediately caught attention. Some were expected, others were surprising enough to make Eagles fans start asking serious questions about what this coaching staff and front office are planning. One of the biggest talking points was attendance. A.J. Brown was not present during the open session, and that instantly became a major discussion around the team. Lane Johnson, Jalen Carter, Dontavian Wicks, and Jahad Campbell were also absent during the media session, although reports indicated that those players had attended earlier OTA practices during the week. Since these workouts are voluntary, nobody inside the organization is publicly making a big issue out of it, but fans are naturally paying attention, especially with the growing speculation surrounding A.J. Brown's future. At the same time, there was very encouraging news involving the offensive line. Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson both practiced fully, which is huge for Philadelphia considering the injuries they battled through last season. Dickerson reportedly underwent stem cell treatment for his knee during the offseason, while Jurgens has continued recovering from the back issue that required surgery after the Super Bowl run. Seeing both players moving well in May is exactly what the Eagles wanted. Andrew Makuba and Johnny Wilson were also full participants. Wilson especially became one of the more interesting names from practice because the Eagles appeared to be expanding his role significantly within the offense. At 6'6", his physical presence immediately stands out, and the coaching staff lined him up in multiple spots, including inside the slot. That versatility could become extremely important this season, depending on how the wide receiver room evolves over the coming months. But the most fascinating offensive storyline may involve DeVonta Smith. With A.J. Brown absent and so much uncertainty surrounding the roster long term, Smith approached these practices like a player preparing to become the unquestioned centerpiece of the passing attack. He worked extensively, stayed heavily involved, and looked fully locked in mentally. There is growing belief inside the organization that Smith is preparing for a massive breakout campaign in 2026. For years, he has been one of the most polished route runners in football, yet many still feel he has been underutilized in stretches of this offense. Now, with the possibility of bigger responsibility ahead, Smith seems determined to prove he can carry the role of a true WR1. And honestly, watching the offense during these sessions, you can already sense philosophical changes happening under Sean Mannion. The Eagles spent a significant amount of time operating with quarterbacks under center, something fans have been begging to see more consistently. Jalen Hurts, Andy Dalton, Tanner McKee, and even developmental quarterback Cole Payton all worked through these concepts during practice. There was a clear emphasis on timing, structure, and purposeful motion within the offense. That last part stood out immediately. For the last few years, there were times when the Eagles used motion almost mechanically, without truly manipulating defenses. During these OTA sessions, the motion actually appeared designed to create advantages, simplify reads, and generate separation. It looked intentional. It looked coordinated. And for Eagles fans frustrated by offensive predictability at times in recent seasons, that development is extremely encouraging. Jalen Hurts spent plenty of time under center handing the ball off to Saquon Barkley, which could signal a more balanced and versatile offensive identity moving forward. The Eagles know they have one of the league's most dangerous backs, and it appears this staff wants to maximize every possible advantage within the running game structure. Another surprise involved the quarterback depth chart. While Hurts remains firmly entrenched as QB1, Andy Dalton surprisingly received QB2 reps during the open practice, ahead of Tanner McKee. The organization had reportedly alternated reps earlier in the week, but many assume McKee held a stronger grip on the backup role entering the offseason. Instead, it now appears to be a legitimate competition. Cole Payton also quietly impressed observers. The young quarterback reportedly displayed strong arm talent and mobility throughout drills, showing more polish than many expected this early in his development. The Eagles are clearly taking a patient approach with him, but internally there seems to be genuine excitement about his long-term potential. Meanwhile, the offensive line alignment may have revealed future plans at tackle. With Lane Johnson absent for a veteran maintenance day, rookie Marquil Bell lined up at right tackle with the first unit. That detail matters because the Eagles selected Bell with significant draft capital, and there is growing belief that Philadelphia is already cross-training him as a possible future successor to Lane Johnson. Jordan Mailata remains locked in on the left side, but Bell getting immediate exposure at right tackle this early says a lot about how highly the organization views him. Defensively, not all the news was positive. Ty Robinson's situation is suddenly becoming concerning. The 2025 fourth-round pick was not working with either the first or second defensive line units during practice. Instead, he spent time in lower rotational groups, which is not where a former mid-round pick wants to be entering year 2. Vic Fangio barely used him last season, and now Robinson appears to be fighting for roster security heading into training camp. On the other hand, several defenders physically transformed during the offseason. Cooper DeJean reportedly arrived looking noticeably stronger and more filled out, while Nolan Smith also added size to his frame entering a critical year for his career development. And then there is the biggest storyline of all beginning to resurface around Philadelphia once again, the possibility of Howie Roseman chasing another superstar trade, because suddenly Myles Garrett rumors are back. Reports connected to Cleveland suggest the Browns may at least be listening internally to the possibility of moving Garrett after June 1st, especially after restructuring his contract earlier this offseason. Financially, the deal becomes far more manageable after that date, and with Cleveland potentially entering another rebuilding phase, the idea of maximizing Garrett's trade value is no longer impossible. Naturally, when a superstar becomes even remotely available, people immediately connect him to Philadelphia because nobody in football operates more aggressively than Howie Roseman. And honestly, when you start imagining a defensive front featuring Jonathan Greenard, Jix Hunt, and Myles Garrett together, it almost sounds unfair. The Eagles already possess one of the strongest rosters in football, but Roseman has never been satisfied with simply being good enough. If there is a chance to land the best defensive player in the NFL, history says he will at least explore every possibility. The real question now is whether Philadelphia would truly consider paying the price Cleveland would demand. Because if the Browns seriously open the door for negotiations, it likely starts with multiple first-round picks, and potentially even a major player included in the package. And that's where this entire conversation becomes fascinating for Eagles fans moving forward. If adding Myles Garrett truly became possible, would you be willing to sacrifice future first-round picks and maybe even a current core player to make it happen? The scary part for the rest of the NFL is that the Eagles may not even feel desperate right now, and that is exactly why they are so dangerous. When a team already has a championship caliber foundation and still has the flexibility to chase another superstar, that is usually when Howie Roseman becomes most aggressive. And the more you look at this roster after these OTA practices, the more it feels like Philadelphia is quietly preparing for another major transition period while still trying to stay in Super Bowl contention at the same time. That balance is not easy to pull off. Usually teams either go all in for the present or reset for the future. The Eagles are trying to do both simultaneously, and some of the clues from these offseason sessions reveal exactly how they are attempting to make that happen. Take the offense, for example. One thing that became obvious during practice was how much emphasis Sean Mannion is putting on structure and adaptability. This offense no longer looks like it wants to rely purely on athletic talent winning individual matchups. Instead, there seems to be a real focus on helping players create easier opportunities before the snap even happens. That matters tremendously for Jalen Hurts. Because over the last couple of years, defenses increasingly forced Hurts into difficult post-snap decisions by taking away explosive plays and forcing the Eagles into predictable situations. During these OTA installs, however, there was noticeable effort to simplify reads through motion, alignment variation, and under-center formations. The offense simply looked more organized, and if that system evolution continues into training camp, it could unlock another level for Hurts entering 2026. The Eagles clearly want to protect him better structurally while also making life easier on the entire offense. Saquon Barkley becomes even more dangerous in a downhill under-center rushing attack. Play action becomes more effective. Defenses are forced to hesitate longer before attacking. Everything starts working together more naturally. That may be why the coaching staff looks so focused on these details during only the first OTA sessions of the year. And while most fans immediately focus on stars, some of the smaller roster battles developing right now could become incredibly important later in the season. Johnny Wilson is one of those names. The Eagles can continue finding creative ways to use him, and his combination of size and versatility gives this offense a completely different dimension. When you have a receiver that large, capable of lining up both outside and inside, defenses are forced into uncomfortable matchups. He can overpower smaller defensive backs, create massive catch windows in traffic, and help the offense in the red zone immediately. You can tell the Eagles want to accelerate his involvement. At the same time, the organization also appears extremely intrigued by the developmental upside of Cole Payton. Several observers came away impressed by how naturally he throws the football and how composed he looked during drills. Nobody expects him to challenge for meaningful snaps right now, but the Eagles have quietly built a reputation for developing quarterbacks internally, and Payton may become another long-term project they genuinely believe in. Still, the biggest tension around this team continues to revolve around the future of A.J. Brown, because even though nobody inside the building is openly saying anything publicly, fans are reading every detail carefully now. DeVonta Smith's approach to the offseason only intensified those conversations. He practiced with urgency, leadership, and confidence, almost like someone preparing to carry a larger offensive burden. And honestly, Eagles fans have every reason to believe he can handle it. Smith has already proven he can dominate against elite competition. His route running is among the cleanest in football. He creates separation consistently, and teammates rave about his work ethic. The frustrating part for many fans is that they believe Philadelphia never fully unleashed him consistently enough. Now that could finally change. And if Smith truly steps into that WR1 role full time, the Eagles may reshape the entire identity of their passing attack around precision, timing, and versatility rather than purely physical dominance. But while the offense is evolving, the defense may still undergo even bigger changes depending on what happens with Myles Garrett. Because internally, Howie Roseman is at least exploring scenarios. He always does. The Browns restructuring Garrett's contract earlier this offseason was not ignored around the league. Executives noticed those details immediately because contract adjustments like that often create future flexibility for potential moves. Cleveland may still prefer keeping Garrett, but multiple reports now suggest the possibility of a trade is no longer completely impossible. And Philadelphia is exactly the type of team capable of pulling off something massive unexpectedly. Howie Roseman has never been afraid of blockbuster deals. He traded for A.J. Brown when nobody believed it would happen. He constantly restructures contracts creatively. He manipulates draft capital better than almost any executive in